Dad was a sucker for Covey and Harvey Mackay and Dale Carnegie. These are authors that I read by the time I was 12 or 13 years old, and I soaked it up. I loved how to swim with the sharks without being eaten alive. I loved how to win friends and influence people. I loved the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And so those, without a doubt, some of that thinking made a huge difference.
Welcome to Seeking Excellence. I'm Brett Pinniger. Seeking Excellence is all about identifying and learning from the habits, traits, and skills of great leaders. They share their experiences with us. We learn what motivates them, how they stay focused, and what keeps them grounded. It's an amazing opportunity to be able to share these experiences with you. If you're enjoying this podcast, we would appreciate it if you take the time to subscribe, rate, review, and share it with others. And if you have suggestions for people that would be great guests on Seeking Excellence, email us at seekingexcellence@brettpinniger.com. In my work, I coach executives, facilitate peer groups, and offer leadership development programs. I love helping leaders and teams become their best and enjoy the bottom line results that striving for excellence enables. You can learn more about my work at brettpinniger.com. Check the show notes for all the specifics. Now, let me introduce my guest, Trent Kaufman. Trent is the CEO of the Cicero Group, a management consulting firm based in Salt Lake City. Trent has done some amazing work on how to use performance data to maximize individual and team performance. Trent's first career was in public education. He began as a social studies teacher in Washington, D.C., before becoming a high school principal in the Bay Area of California. Trent earned a master's degree from Berkeley and a master's and doctorate from Harvard. In our discussion, Trent shares his thoughts on the importance of culture on your products and whether or not you treat each other like your clients or customers. He introduces us to their cultural guidebook, the Cicero Way, and the innovative approach they use to hold people accountable to it, the influence of his dad on his leadership approach, and how relentless feedback from his university professors and their willingness to mentor him has made all the difference. And lastly, his belief in the capacity of us as human beings. Let's jump right in. Trent, it is great to be with you today.
Thanks for having me.
It's an honor to be able to interview you and learn a little bit more about your approach to leadership and also the great work of leadership you do here at the Cicero Group. Wondering if you could start out by just telling us a little bit about your work at the Cicero Group.
Absolutely. The Cicero Group is a strategy consulting, management consulting company, one of many that has attempted to set up shop here in the Salt Lake City area. We believe we're the most successful that's ever set up shop here, and certainly the largest management consulting company in the Intermountain West. We, there's a lot of very traditional management and strategy consulting work we do, and it runs the gamut from, I'd say we help inform strategy, we help create strategy, and we help implement strategy. Those are our 3 pillars. But our particular areas of strength are in the first and third of those pillars. The first is our ability to inform a company's strategic direction with good, quantitative, often new data that we can bring to bear to help our clients understand their market, understand their business, understand their competitors in ways that help them leapfrog the competition. And then the third pillar, which is implement strategy. One of my favorite client quotes we've ever received was from Dave Bywater down at Vivint, who I think is on your.
He is. In fact,
he was at Vivint, not Vivint Solar, when we did work for him. He's a former Bain consultant himself, and he said the beauty of Cicero is that for the same price that you would pay one of the big 3 consulting companies, Cicero will actually stick around and help you implement the strategy they helped you create. And we love that part of the work where we get to roll up our sleeves and help companies implement a new direction. It's a highly accountable way to work. If we're creating a strategy for you and we know we're the ones that are going to be on the hook to actually do it, it's a very accountable way to help us have skin in the game, so to speak.
Sure.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the typical client. How big are they? Are these typically regional firms, multinational firms, Fortune 500 firms?
Yeah, we've served firms of basically all sizes and geographies, but we do have some sweet spots we work particularly well within the marketing and sales function and operations functions of an organization, especially projects that center around growth. And so when companies in the $400 million to $3 to $4 billion range are looking for, it could be a new product category, it could be an acquisition, it could be new channels. Those are great moments for those sizes of firms to employ Cicero.
Outstanding.
Yeah.
So you're the CEO of Cicero Group. What's it like to lead this firm? What are some of the unique opportunities or challenges you face leading a management consulting firm?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of unique things for listeners. I would imagine a lot of your listeners run or are involved in product companies.
Mm-hmm.
So services companies are very unique, and management consulting is very unique within the category of services. The main difference is that our product is our people. And so when we talk about capacity development of our team, when we talk about training, when we talk about onboarding, those are not just critical business functions. Those are actually product improvement dollars that we're spending. That dynamic, that the work we do with our people here internally is our product development work, leads to a lot of, I think, really exciting leadership opportunities. Mm-hmm. Because that work that I think a lot of leaders love to do, which is developing internal capacity, has just immediate impact on our bottom line. Because if I'm able to help a team become a little more efficient in the amount of time they take to come up with a solution for a client, well, that's a bottom line, immediate bottom line response. If I'm able to help a team better position themselves and win more work because of that positioning, again, a direct impact to the financial performance of our company. So I think that makes for a really exciting leadership dynamic. I think the regional aspect of our firm, the fact that we're in Salt Lake City, Utah, there's real mixed blessings there. On the one hand, there's a lot of talent in mm-hmm. Utah. On the other hand, companies have really figured out that Cicero's a talent base. What should we say? There's a plethora of talent at Cicero, and we do a lot of training, and so we work hard to retain our folks.
Exactly.
There's a lot of poaching going on of our team here at Cicero, which we take some pride in that as well. We have alumni at all of the major Utah companies in very senior positions now, which is exciting. Those are some of the immediate thoughts that come to mind.
So when you think about the culture you're creating here and the opportunities that creates for leverage in the delivery of your products, your offerings to your clients here, there are lots of different elements of culture. There's things like communication, decision-making, interacting with other people, holding good meetings. Are there certain things you see that are the most impactful in terms of overall effectiveness of your team? I mean, what does it come down to? Is there some basic building blocks of team success that you see here at Cicero that we could help to translate to other organizations that are thinking about, boy, if there was one or two things I could improve in my teams, what would they be?
Yeah. We work really hard on that because, like I said, it's not just like any business. We're actually tweaking our product. When we work on culture, we're actually directly impacting our product. We have a large document called the Cicero Way, and I've been asked many times to boil that down. And I'd say it probably comes down to one basic principle, and it's treat each other like clients. Mm-hmm. And so what we do is we practice. Well, an analogy I'd give is I have a good friend of mine who pushes me on my parenting. And he says, Trent, you realize that your kids' practice for the real world is in the home. Mm-hmm. And so you need to constantly be providing kids opportunities to engage and interact in ways in your home and fail and make mistakes. And that's proving grounds. You get to train and help develop. So I'd analogize that to inside Cicero Group. The way we interact with each other is a practice for how we're going to interact with clients. And so that basic principle leads to lots of sub-principles, but treat each other like clients. Simple things like return and report. Mm-hmm. It is the responsibility of the person who gets a task or an action to figure out the right way to return and report to the individual from whom he or she received the action item. And clients require that.
You bet.
Internally, it's not as much required unless we commit to treating each other, like clients. Responsiveness, eagerness, those are the sorts of traits that we require internally, even though we really don't have to, but we do it because we're practicing for that client-ready moment.
I love this concept of the Cicero Way, this document that seems to capture sort of the essence of what it means to work at Cicero. How did that get developed? Who was involved in the development of that?
Yeah, that's great. It's a great question. I joined the firm now 11 years ago. A lot of the core principles of the Cicero Way had been ingrained already by our founder, Randy Shumway. Mm-hmm. And he had learned that through his own work he worked at Bain, and then he was in the startup in the 90s, a bunch of startups in the 90s in San Francisco. He has an MBA from HBS. And so, just some neat people he'd interacted with in his life and had developed some things. And interestingly, they hadn't been codified. And so I've really enjoyed the role over the years of putting those principles that were almost so ingrained in Randy and the organization that they couldn't even describe them themselves, to having the role of codifying those and writing those down and then refining them and expanding and contracting and trying to synthesize them over the years. So it's something from the foundation, mm-hmm. for sure, and then some refinement over the years as we've brought in senior outside talent who have their own perspectives and their own ways of working. And then it's become very formal now. We have Cicero Way certification. It takes about a year, and it's something that employees get a $1,000 bonus when they get their final sign off on Cicero Way certification. They get a bunch of swag with Cicero logos. Cool. They get a little plaque that people have some pride in. I mean, some people have said they've learned more in their Cicero Way certification than their MBA program, because it's that powerful. And myself, we developed it, but I had to go through and have people sign me off and get my own Cicero Way certification.
And what kind of things would occur in the sign-off? I mean, is it basically being able to sort of recite certain elements of it, or is it are there other sort of key parts of the certification? Basically,
you have two kinds of quote-unquote supervisors at Cicero. You've got whoever's leading the current project you're on, whatever current client project you're on, and then you have an internal mentor who does your reviews. Mm-hmm. Either of those individuals can sign off on one of the, I think, 27 or so elements. But what you need to do is demonstrate 3 times in real projects that you have learned that Cicero Way attribute. So going back to return.
So it's not just book smart.
No, not at all.
It's actually sort of boots on the ground. I can do what it is I learned in the Cicero Way.
Yeah, actually, in this case, there's no reciting. There's no book. There's no test. It's just demonstrating it 3 times.
Oh, I love that.
In a project setting.
I love that. That is so cool. That is so cool. What a great example for a lot of organizations to be thinking about. So let's sort of pivot from there sort of to you now as a leader here. Obviously, you embody the Cicero Way to a certain degree. You've done it for 11 years. This is a part of your DNA now, your leadership DNA. Let's sort of take a step back here and talk about some of maybe the formative milestones that developed you as a leader. As a kid, maybe as a young adult. Let's identify kind of the 2 or 3 or 4 milestones in your life that you say, boy, these really were formative periods of time that sort of established who I am as a leader. I once, in fact, it was said, it was on a previous podcast here, I learned everything I know about leadership before I became a leader. And so what would be some of those key sort of activities in your life or experiences in your life that defined you as a leader?
I want to touch on that point for a moment. As I was thinking this morning, knowing you were coming this morning, one of the thoughts that really recurred to me was, again, a parenting analogy. By the time you have teenagers, you can't really spend much time working on yourself anymore. You really kind of need to be working on them. And I don't mean that you're not doing any self-care, but you need to have developed the kinds of habits and behaviors and attitudes that are going to are really going to stick with you and help you keep improving without a lot of deliberate attention. Because if you have any time for deliberate attention to improvement, you're going to want to spend that on your teenagers. I feel similarly about having taken this role as CEO. It doesn't by any means reflect a stagnation. I'm improving every day, I hope. But by the time you have a position like that, any moment you have to set goals or to change some major behavior probably needs to be spent on your firm, not necessarily on yourself. So that really resonates with me, this concept that you need to have, everything you learned you kind of happened before you actually became a leader. So a couple foundational moments. One, I had the sad but meaningful experience of laying my dad to rest about 10 days ago. And so,
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, thanks. It's a trying time for sure. But what it did for me was make me go back to a time that I don't spend a lot of time reflecting on, but I went back to those formative years and tried to define, his role in who I am today. And so, it's hard for me not to share a couple of those experiences because they're very top of mind. One, my dad was a sucker for Covey and Harvey Mackay, and Dale Carnegie. These are authors that I read by the time I was 12 or 13 years old. And I soaked it up. I loved how to swim with the sharks without being eaten alive. I loved how to win friends and influence people. I loved the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And so those, without a doubt, some of that thinking made a huge difference. I'd say of all of it, the one that made the biggest difference was Covey's first habit, which is be proactive. Mm-hmm. And I was surrounded by individuals in life who seemed to be, succumb to victimitis and talked a lot about the influence of their circumstances on who they were. And Covey and my dad taught me the exact opposite of true is true. Within the circumstances you've been given, you have enormous control. And so if you focus on those things, you can become and do just about anything you want. So that led to a conversation my sophomore year, which seemed really ambitious at the time. I was at a 4,000 student high school in Southern California, so a huge high school. And I said, Dad, I think maybe I want to be involved in student government. And he said, well, that's a great idea. Let's start talking about it. And for whatever reason, we determined that it was time for me to get my first Franklin Day Planner. So this is 1992 or 91. I'm a sophomore in high school wanting to run for junior class president. And we decide that I ought to start figuring out how to organize my day and plan my time and create priorities. And so that summer, I ran for office. I won for junior class president. And that summer, I listened to a series, hours and hours of cassette tapes that trained you on how to use the Franklin Day Planner. And again, I just soaked it up. And I look back and I compare to the kinds of things maybe some of my peers were interested in and they were doing. And it's very different. And really from at that moment learned about being proactive, planning ahead, prioritizing things. And I'd say probably the most foundational thing in my life to prepare me to be a leader were those years, my sophomore, junior, and senior years. I'd say there's probably a second thing, and then I don't know that I have a third or a fourth, but they may come to me. But a second thing I'd say is I was a freshman at BYU, and I was in Paul Edwards' Political Science 110. And I had gotten good enough grades to get into BYU, but I had never taken an AP class, never taken an honors class. I didn't really know what rigor was. I got, kind of the easy A concept in high school. And I wrote my first paper for Paul Edwards, who is now, who actually was the head editorialist for the Deseret News for a while. And then he's now an advisor to, or a spokesman for Gary Herbert, right? So
good guy.
Amazing human being. But at the time he was just a political science professor at BYU. We wrote our first paper, and it was marked up when I got it back. The worst grade I'd ever gotten on anything I'd ever submitted. And Dr. Edwards was very disappointed in the effort I'd put forth in the paper. And so I went to see him, and the skills I had learned through the Franklin Day Planner, et cetera, wasn't how to write or how to learn. It was maybe relationships. So I went and I thought I'd kind of work this guy a little bit and let him know that I'm the real deal and I'm okay. And he was relentless with me instead. He didn't want to have a man-to-man talk. He wanted to tell me how terrible a writer I was. And I remember he went from being frustrated with me in the same meeting to being angry with every English teacher I'd ever had for clearly not having taught me. He said, Trent, do you know simple concepts like parallelism? And I said, Dr. Edwards, I've never heard of that in my life. And he said, didn't you take English 105 or 101 last semester? What did you do in that class? So he was frustrated with me, ended up frustrating with my teachers. And what ensued was a once a month meeting I had with him during that semester where he would open writing books with me and teach me writing as my poli-sci teacher.
Unbelievable.
So the care and attention he gave, but mostly the skill he taught me, which is how to communicate in writing, I think is very, very foundational to my leadership today. I had a similar experience when I was pursuing a doctorate at Harvard. Even though I had learned a lot from Dr. Edwards, I still got everything was graded on a curve in my program at Harvard, and I got the lowest grade in my cohort, my first year at Harvard, on the first paper we wrote. And again, I had developed a relationship with a professor, Susan Moore Johnson, who very patiently walked me through what it means to write well. And I view both of those as very foundational to what it means to be a leader. Writing isn't just about writing, it's about thinking. And so I feel like I learned to write, but I really learned how to think clearly as well through those experiences.
So let's go back to both of these and maybe think about them in parallel. So when you think about your reaction to Professor Edwards and his saying, hey, this is the worst paper I've ever seen, or you can do better than this, your teachers didn't teach you. What did it feel like initially? I mean, do you have any kind of remembrance? It was like, was it an ego hit? Was it man, I'm bad, I'm no good here? I mean, what was the mental model?
Two very different reactions. So for the Dr. Edwards paper, it was just, it was shock and surprise. I didn't even have a framework for how I would respond. I assumed it was misinterpretation on his part, or something had gone wrong in my understanding of the assignment or his reading of my paper, because I just never experienced that before. So without question, it was more shock at that point. I wasn't humble enough maybe to receive the message he intended to send. My paper at Harvard, on the other hand, I had really worked hard on it. So I had put my full effort in. I thought I knew what good thinking and good writing was. And that was a moment of feeling inadequate. I from the beginning when I got in, I didn't really feel like I belonged at an Ivy League school. I was a public school kid from Southern California, squeezed by in my undergrad. My test scores were good, not great. And so that feeling of inadequacy was revisited when I got that first paper. And I realized that I wasn't going to relationship my way through that class. I was going to actually have to dig even deeper and learn some really tough skills and work even harder. Proudly on our sixth and final paper that year, I received the highest mark. And I'm convinced I received probably the third or fourth, but the teacher saw my effort and said, so I kind of relationshiped my way through that. I know I did a lot better, but I have big doubts about whether or not knowing the other writers in that class, whether I actually achieved the highest mark there.
Well, knowing many professors here, the fact that both of these professors were willing to spend a lot of time with you is in itself quite remarkable. What do you attribute that to?
Oh, and actually I said Susan Moore Johnson. She was the initial one that hit me hard, but her co-teacher, Noni Lasso, was actually the one that spent real time with me. So Paul Edwards and Noni Lasso, I don't know. I love them to death. I can't believe they took the time they took. It's going far and above. I mean, that's not what professors are rewarded for. That's In fact, they're rewarded for other things. Edwards showed his stripes a couple times. He was very frustrated and impatient with what I didn't know, and the fact that he was the one responsible for teaching, it to me. But he still did it.
He was in.
He did it. He did it for sure. Noni, I think was a true educator at heart and got a lot of joy out of seeing the development of someone else. And you've inspired me. I've written Paul. I wrote Paul a big long letter, reminding him of the story. He hadn't really remembered it. You've inspired me to write Noni and remind her of what an impact she's had in my life.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, I think that may also, if I were to peel back a little bit here, wonder if whether or not some of the skills you learned from Steve Covey and from the Franklin Covey group and those other people sort of allowed you to be sort of in the moment enough to where you could say, I'm really interested in learning. And this isn't just about getting the good grade. I want to get better here. And I don't know if you feel any of that at all.
I think that's a really meaningful leadership dilemma, which is, when do you dive in? When do you get technical? When do you get in the weeds, and when do you not? And I think leadership studies, and some of those studies I had as a kid, taught me how to get through life without getting into the deep and without learning technical hard skills. Mm-hmm. And there were moments in life, especially with the degrees that I've pursued, where that was not adequate. Again, I couldn't relationship my way through it. I had to dive deeply. And so I think, as you think about a role as CEO, look, being a CEO is a series of contradictions. One of the many is I have to know everything that's going on in the firm all the time, and I have to be enough aware that I can engage with almost anyone about what they're working on so they know their work matters to the organization. On the other hand, there are moments when I have to dive so deeply that I need absolute quiet for hours on end so that I can dig to the very core of an issue. This happened just yesterday. I had to dive to the very core of the issue to come up with the right solution, because that was my job. No one else was going to ideate a solution. I needed to come up with the solution for a dilemma we've been encountering, and it required the kind of depth and technical skill that I learned from some of these professors.
So how do you balance those two things? Because obviously you could go deep a lot and lose traction as the leader, as the person who's championing the company, and yet if you don't go deep enough, you're going to the company's going to be less effective, less efficient here. Any sort of guidelines or rules that you use to guide how much time you spend doing either of those, or is it more intuitive?
I give a couple core principles. One is, you take yourself everywhere you go. So I think there's going to be some personality differences between leaders, and I don't think you can ignore that. If you're the type of person who is really good at and gets a lot of satisfaction by diving deeply into the details, I think you should probably do that a little more than the next leader who gets a little more satisfaction in staying at a higher level and covering more ground at not such a deep level. I'm the opposite. So my personality is more one that likes to quickly ramp up to let's say a B level of understanding about mm-hmm. something, contribute, add value, and then expect others on the team to get all the way to the A, to get all Great. The way to the root. That's more my personality. I've seen leaders who are the other way, and it can totally work. So I think the first principle is you can't ignore your personality. Mm-hmm. It is what it is, and so embrace it. And then, I have to push myself when needed to go deep and be the guy who knows all the facts and figures. Others probably have to push themselves to not go deep all the time, and I think that's fine as long as you're aware of that. So that's one principle. A second principle that I'm really learning, I'm now in my second year, and I'd say the number one shift I've made in my leadership between year one and year two as CEO of Cicero Group is that the leaders probably number one, the best way a leader can make a difference in the organization for the organization is to be the one that's always focused on impact. That may seem super intuitive to most listeners, but I can get excited about systems and processes and people development like anyone else can. But I think the point there is most of the people we hire are going to be good at that and can really easily grasp, how to improve an internal process mm-hmm. or how to improve development. The rare skill is constantly figuring out the priority, which things are the highest priority, because which things are going to have the biggest impact on the firm. And so keeping a really careful eye on impact, both your own, the impact of your own actions on the firm, and by impact, I mean on the bottom line of the firm, like either top or either revenue or costs. And if I can be the one that's constantly harping on that and focusing on that, then other people can play to that more natural way of thinking, which is how to improve and create sustainability within the org.
So let's say for a second here, you've got an area where you see a disconnect between maybe the actions of the firm or group and impact that you're trying to create here. What's your approach from a leader's perspective to build alignment between what you see needs to occur and what is actually happening so far?
Yeah, so let me contradict myself. On the one hand, I think the leader's job is impact. On the other hand, there's a constant balance between working within the systems you've created of the organization and creating some intentional disruption. And I also think here leaders have personalities, and you should stick with your personality and then force yourself to be a little more balanced. So I've worked with senior leaders who, the moment a thought comes to their mind that's the right idea, they will go and immediately address it and compel a team or an individual to change path. Mm-hmm. I don't have that bone in my body. I think it's been done to me enough in my career, and I know what it feels like.
So what does it feel like?
Well, it often feels like, boy, that's a good idea. But how do we know right now at this moment that it's better than the idea we were already on? Because there's going to have to be a trade-off. We can pursue that, but we're going to have to drop something else. And so until we can talk clearly about the trade-off, then I have a hard time accepting that new thing, even though I can often be compelled by a good leader who's energetic and excited about an idea. Until we can talk about trade-off, I have a hard time, charging up that hill. And these same individuals who can be super articulate in the moment about a great new idea, there's often an assumption that there is no trade-off, that we're going to pursue this new thing and it's not going to come at any cost at all. And that's just never true. So that's how it feels. And so in my own leadership, I actually need to force myself sometimes to go to someone with a new idea and be a little disruptive, because I think that's healthy for an organization too, to be willing to make mid-course adjustments and be excited about an idea and chase it immediately when the iron's hot. Mm-hmm. But my more natural instinct is to think, okay, what meeting, what group of people, what system or process do we have that this new idea fits in? And then I figure out how to get it on the right agenda, for the right group of people. And then what's nice is by the time that meeting happens in 2 weeks or 1 week or 3 weeks, I've had more time also to process how important is this idea, where does it fit in, when should we pursue it. That's the more natural pursuit for me.
So when you use that natural approach here, how do you think your team responds to that? I mean, are they even aware that you're doing it? Do they see your intentional use of existing systems or processes to inject new ideas, or what is their reaction, if anything?
I think I get both. I think there's people who like the excitable leader who's gonna come up with an idea and help. And let's get charged. Let's work all weekend and let's get this done. So I think there are some personalities who find that uninspiring. Mm-hmm. But I think most internal leaders in the firm, if you're really trying to empower them and help internal leaders develop their own sense of ownership and their own sense of direction, I think they appreciate that it shows an enormous amount of respect for the plan they already have in place, for the work they're already doing. I think for the most part, it's very well appreciated.
So if you take that kind of day-to-day impact that you got, and then you've got kind of what I'll call the vision of the organization, which is maybe the umbrella upon which all this stuff fits in here. How do you sort of vary your leadership style between, hey, I've got an idea for a way we can either better support this client or better support the onboarding of new employees or whatever it happens to be, to this is who the Cicero group is, and this is what we're all about, and this is where we're going here. Do you find you use a different style when it comes to kind of the vision, or do you use that same style?
It's a great question. The balance between the vision and the day-to-day operation of the company, I'd say I'm looking forward to year 3 as a way to better figure that out. I find that I personally lose track of the vision pretty easily, and that's a terrible thing for a CEO to do. The one person who shouldn't do that, is the CEO. And so I'll be listening for your podcast to see if others have ideas for me there. If it's a tickler in your calendar every day, or if it's some formal moment to approach that and to remember that.
I think you got it right under your nose, actually, Trent. Just from the earlier part of our conversation, I think the Cicero way, at some level, is the embodiment of that vision. It's if we behave and we act and we do it in a certain way, then we will eventually become and go where we want to go. I mean, it's sort of this notion of thoughts lead to words, leads to actions, lead to outcomes. And if you're trying to sort of capture who you are as an entity, then it's likely just going to naturally evolve into the outcomes you're looking for, because they flow from step to step to step.
Yeah, I love it.
So let's talk a little bit about your leadership style. Obviously, from what we talked about so far, sort of not super sort of in your face, not super intense, kind of my way or the highway. You're not a taskmaster. You're an influencer in that regard. That's an incredibly important part of leadership, but there are other elements of leadership as well. Let's talk about accountability, for example, here. How would people describe your style of holding people accountable to results?
I think that's a strength of mine. I may not be in your face, but when the deadline comes and, when the monthly meeting where we review your practice areas progress comes, we're going to be looking at what you promised. So I'm a big believer in letting people set their own kind of goals and expectations, so long as it fits within, the organization. But then with that ability to choose your own outcomes and goals comes, I'd call it relentless accountability. I mean, I think if we can't get done what we commit to get done in the amount of time we commit it to get done, who are we? I mean, that's a essential part of at least my leadership approach. And I'd add to that, there's something unique about what I was doing before I became CEO. I was the number 2 for 10 years. To an amazing leader from whom I learned an enormous amount of things. And one thing you learn quickly as the number 2, it's kind of like a chief operation officer. What I learned very early on is that the best way to help the firm grow is to take no credit for the good things that are happening. Liberally distribute credit to other people. And I'm really proud to have continued that as the CEO. My self-esteem is coming from the company's performance, not from anyone attributing the company's performance to me. And I think leaders, I've read a lot of books about good senior leaders in companies, and I've developed a little bit of an allergy to some of them. And it's because there is a trend, I think, between the leaders that we read about and their company's performance after they leave. And I want to build the type of company that will continue on the exact same growth trajectory it was on while I was there. And it's not dependent on me. It is dependent on my leadership, but not on me. And so I'm building the kind of company that continues to grow long beyond the time I'm here. In fact, we just hired a principal, which is one level below partner, so a top 15 person in our firm. And she has worked in a variety of organizations, including big consulting firms. And she actually was formerly on George W. Bush's cabinet. So we're talking, she was a staffer for a cabinet member for George W. Bush. Senior person, super mega talented. She came to her first management team meeting, which is every Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. And afterwards I said, what do you think? She said, Trent, I've been in a lot of meetings. I've never heard so many people give other people credit for the successes we were talking about. Because we have a moment in leadership team meeting where we talk about recent wins. And she said every single one credited someone else for the win, even though the spokesperson was the one who was, describing the win. And they were crediting junior people. Like most organizations, people are trying to, get the credit, maybe assign more credit to themselves than they deserve. And here they were assigning more credit to others than they deserve. And I view that's not just me, that's part of the Cicero Way, that's part of the culture, but there's almost nothing she could have said that would have made me more proud than to hear that impression. And that's you don't want to be dependent on a person, and in particular the CEO. You don't want to be dependent on them.
That's clearly the way sort of screams out of that, but also your style, because you reinforce that through your actions. It's the actions and way you sort of embody yourself as a leader that also makes that way possible. It's not just what's in the book, it's actually what we see our leaders do here. Would you say you lead more from the front or more from the back?
So when I became CEO, my first day of my tenure was also our first day in our new building. We have this fantastic new space that we built out.
It is awesome.
Part of the vision of our former CEO, Randy Shumway, who's, by the way, still here and an active partner and still works full time at Cicero. So I inherited this amazing space. And I made a decision when we moved in to not have an office and instead to sit in an open, shared, basically an open workspace with everyone else, with no additional amenity relative to the other employees. And again, we talked earlier about your kind of natural instincts. My natural instinct is to lead from behind. And I have to do things to force myself, to develop different kinds of habits. So one thing I did was sit in the middle of the office. That's a lead from the front kind of approach. You're in the thick of it. You're in it. You're there, accessible and available. So I think my natural instinct is to lead from behind. But people need. The firm needs someone who's willing to step up, make big announcements, get excited, grab everyone for a fun putting contest on a, kind of a lazy summer day. And I have to coach myself to do those sorts of things, to be that leader from the front. So I think without question, my instinct is lead from behind, and I'm trying to learn from other good leaders I've watched and be a little bit more of that symbolic leader that I think teams need as well.
So who are some modern day sort of leader examples that you look to, existing CEOs for other organizations, modern day well-known figures that really sort of exemplify the leadership style that you are seeking to implement here at Cicero?
That's great. And I get to work with some really neat and impressive leaders out there with whom I've developed strong relationships with because we're a consulting firm. A couple that I absolutely adore. One is a relatively new leader at Western Governors University. His name's Scott Pulsiver. He would be someone I'd recommend you interview for the podcast if you haven't yet. Do you know Scott?
I do know Scott,
okay.
And we actually worked together many years ago.
Okay, so you know Scott. So this is also kind of a new position for him. He's a very public leader of a very public organization. Scott, talk about that vision. Almost every meeting I'm in with Scott, he's reminding someone of his 4 pillars. And I could almost recite them to you. I've heard them so often. And I think that's neat that he is staying at that vision level and he is constantly reminding people of what that vision is. I've seen him also get into the weeds when he needs to, but at that size of an organization, I think he needs to get into the weeds less often than I do as a CEO of this size of organization. I also have seen so WGU's been a client for about 5 years before Scott ever showed up. So I knew the prior president very well, Bob Mendenhall. I also knew all of the senior folks on the team. One of them in particular, with whom I've had a great relationship that I respect a ton of, is Pat Partridge. Pat was there from the beginning. He's the CMO. He was there from the beginning with Bob when the university was founded. And you would have predicted that he would not have survived a regime change like this. Instead, he's thrived. And he's not the only one. So many other senior leaders there have just thrived under Scott's leadership. So how does someone come in with such strong aptitude for vision and direction and actually be so vocal about changing the direction of the organization and maintain the institutional knowledge? That's impressive.
Remarkable.
Not everybody stayed. The folks who didn't believe in the new vision, he didn't want them around. But that's pretty neat. I'm inspired by Scott Pulsifer. Then there are two that are very similar. One is named John Vander Ark. He's the chief operating officer at Republic Services, a Fortune 300 trash collection company headquartered in Scottsdale, Arizona. And the other is Dave Bywater, now at Vivint Solar. Both former consultants, not just like 1 or 2 years of consulting, but John had become a partner at McKinsey. Dave Bywater, I don't know what level he had achieved, but he didn't just do an internship at a consulting firm. Right. And so I view their leadership as more accessible to me because we have a lot of similar instincts. Both are incredibly data driven. And that's an impressive leadership style to me, that they can be excitable, but not without data to compel them. And I think the neat thing about that trait is that because they use data in their vision and in their leadership, it's really hard to argue with them. You know, they get consensus pretty quickly because there's kind of hard data behind what they're suggesting. And they're also leaders that keep that data very top of mind, and they're able to communicate it in the moment with a team member without needing to go back and consult a deck where the data point was. You know, Dave and my son played in the same baseball league last year, and I asked him how it's going, and you'll ask him the same thing if you haven't interviewed him already, and he will tell you 5 or 6 very quantitative things that are forcing Vivint Solar to be a very unique provider of solar power, and he'll use really hard data to describe it. John Vander Ark, in meetings with him at Republic, he's used data that I've given him to argue a point to me, maybe a data point that hasn't been top of mind for me, but he'll remember it and use it to make a very compelling point that helps steer the direction of the company. So there's a couple folks that I respect a lot, and for very actually different reasons.
But good examples of it, because one of the things that I see all the time is that it's lonely. Even though you're out there in the middle of the bullpen out here, and you're standing in the middle of 30, 40 people all around you here on the main floor of Cicero, there's an isolation that occurs. And so obviously you have the ability to interact with clients and talk about things, but how else do you stay sort of centered and to stay connected and to make sure what you're hearing is what you really need to hear?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Being a CEO of a consulting company is less lonely than being the CEO of another type of company. It's like a managing director kind of role. I'm like the partner who's taking a turn at this for a few years. And so really that senior partner team and then the full partner team, there's almost nothing that I'm thinking or doing or learning that they aren't at the same time. So there's not much that there's not much of a burden I bear on my own. But I was told about that loneliness, and so I joined actually a group called YPO, Young Presidents Organization, and I have a group of 8 CEOs who are roughly my age, running companies, roughly this size. And we have an opportunity in a absolutely tight-lipped, confidential meeting once a month where we explore the deepest of our personal and professional challenges together. And I see how relieving it is for the others who do work in more lonely CEO jobs. And it's even relieving for me, even though I'm not as lonely, as the CEO of Cicero. And so the counsel I would give other CEOs, especially those that are new to the job, first of all, it's more different to be the CEO than you would think. And I was as close to being the CEO as anyone could be at Cicero prior to becoming the CEO. Nonetheless, it's a very different mantle, and it's much more challenging than you're going to think. It's much more caused you to question yourself much more than you had previously questioned yourself. Much, much more difficult. So that because of that, I would look for opportunities to help to share that burden and learn from others.
Peer groups, then obviously,
I
is
think
it's really big deal.
I think it's a big deal.
Yep.
I think
Something
it's a
we're
really big
actually going to be implementing here at the group I'm with here. We're going to be doing some slightly different peer groups than you do at YPO, but the same concept, where we bring together executives and help them learn from each other, hold each other accountable, gain insights here, have some fun in a way that allows them to feel less isolated and and more connected with other people here.
Yeah.
Let's go just a little bit deeper here into your mindsets here, and then we'll go ahead and get towards wrap up here.
Let me just grab one drink. You go ahead and.
So when you think about your sort of your worldview, let's talk about kind of when Trent sees the world. How do you see the world? What's the kind of the mental model that you use to view the world? Is it what kind of words would you use to describe here your just worldview of Cicero, of your leadership? I mean, how would you describe that?
Wow. Huh. There's the one I'd like to say, and then there's probably the real one. So I'm gonna give you the real one. What fuels and drives me is a deep, borderline spiritual belief in the human capacity. And I am so passionate about kids. So we didn't talk much about the education work that I've done in the prior parts of my career, and I still do. And it's probably not real. We don't need to dive into that. But my wife always says, well, now that my dad has passed, she's seen me cry more, but she's only seen me cry twice as an adult. The first was when we broke up prior to getting engaged, which is good that I cried then. She knows how much she means to me. And second was when I was driving home from having seen a movie called Waiting for Superman, which is a really tough documentary on the state of public schools in the U.S. And so the life model or the mental model that fuels me is that humans are so much more capable than we believe, than we actualize, and every person has room for growth and development and increased happiness. So I definitely believe that about myself and seek for opportunities to learn and develop and grow and find ways to be more balanced and to be happier and more content. But man, I love working with my own kids. Maybe that's why I had 7, so I could have many opportunities, many swings at the bat. But I just love to listen to kids. I love to hear what's going on in their minds. It's so inspiring to hear a 4-year-old who has no social filter, who has, by the age of 4, has learned to do 2 of the most sophisticated things they'll ever learn to do. They've learned to walk and talk.
Indeed.
Mostly without formal learning. They just kind of watch and try and experiment and figure it out. And then to hear the way they describe what they're seeing, I can't describe with words what it does for my soul to interact with other humans who are on a development or a growth trajectory, and then to feel like I can contribute in some way to their development. So, as I say that out loud, it's probably super predictable that I would have gotten into a services business, and it's super predictable that I would have had a big family. It's predictable that I would have gotten into education and be passionate about education. So is that enough of a mental model?
That is a
and
mental
maybe
model.
getting into those fields influenced my mental model as well.
Or the mental model, then you acted with integrity against that mental model by doing the things you've done here. And frankly, it's one of the things that's challenging at times is we have these mental models and sometimes we don't act in integrity with them. We behave in ways that are different than we believe, and there creates dissonance and pain and suffering for us here. But when you think about this mental model here, think about its development here. I mean, did it spring like from whole cloth in your mind here, or is it something that's evolved over time? And where do you think its genesis was?
I made a decision in undergrad to become a teacher. So my first job was I was a high school teacher in Northern California. So at some point, I had a mentor I had a mentor who was a high school principal, and got me excited about the career option. I then went and interviewed 4 different colleges at my undergrad institution. I interviewed their their placement director, so like the person who thinks about jobs and what jobs are available. And I only got to 2. I went to the business school, and I couldn't get the business school person to talk about anything other than exiting salaries and financial growth opportunities for graduates. Had a hard time even getting him to name the specific roles, organizations that the graduates had gone to. What he was clearly most focused on was exiting salary. So I didn't know at the time how uninspiring it was. I just knew I walked out, and I remember calling my dad and saying, "Hey, BYU, it turns out they're producing like $45,000, $50,000 a year, kind of exiting salaries. This was the late '90s. Wow, like I could maybe buy a house and we could start a family and those sorts of things." I went to the second, which was the education school, and Bobby, I remember her name. She told me I was in the wrong. Like, Trent, this isn't for you. And I said, "Why?" And she goes, "Well, tell me about your life goals." I said, "Well, I really, I'm married. I want to have a family. I want to have a certain lifestyle." And she said, "You're just never going to get it in this field." And it actually intrigued me more than anything. And so as I probed, what she could articulate was the kind of impact I could have on kids. And I remember then calling my dad and saying, "Is this crazy?" And he said something to the effect of, "If you do something you love, you'll figure out a way to make it work." And here I am running, the largest management consulting company, at least in the state of Utah, if not the Intermountain West. And I get to still influence education, but I cut my teeth in my career as a high school teacher. And then I became a high school principal at age 26 in Northern California, and, making more money than I need and that I ever thought I needed or would earn, but still getting to focus on that core principle of helping others grow and develop.
Boy, I love that. We need to do a whole nother podcast here on your experience as a high school principal here. I'm sure there are plenty of experiences there to share here. Just as we wrap up here, would you describe yourself as somebody who is motivated internally or externally?
You got to tell me a little bit more about that. I've never heard that
when you
exact
think
question. I've heard introvert and extrovert.
No,
but
you're motivated. Does your motivation come from within, or are you motivated by more external goals and things of that sort?
Oh man, I wish it were internal, but it's definitely external. If how hard I work out when I'm alone in my gym at home compared to when I'm in the gym where other people are watching, if that's a sign, I work out much harder in the public gym. So I fear that I'm more motivated externally than internally.
That's a good awareness there. Would you say that where does pressure come from for you?
Is this again within or without?
No, just what are the sources of pressure for you?
I avoid regret like the plague. So the biggest pressures I feel in life are the worry that my future 25-year-old kid is going to say, "Dad, why did you take the easy road and let me quit that sport? Why didn't you take the harder road and have the long conversation with me and compel me to do, this other thing?" So that fuels my parenting for sure. Similarly at Cicero, I never ever want to take the easy road unless that's the right road. And I'm fueled by the fear that, at some point we'll realize that we took an easy road and that led to less growth than we could have achieved otherwise. So I don't know if that's scalable or replicable to other people, but that's an authentic answer for sure.
Communication style, indirect or direct, and don't pull the punches.
Don't pull the punches ever. You can be generous and kind, but I have developed loyalty from others, and they openly, if there's one characteristic I'm praised for most often by team members, even clients, it's not mincing words, and being super direct And what I've learned it accomplishes more than anything is it helps you fail fast. It helps you know who the winners and losers are early on, and leads to more mental stability for me and inner peace if my relationships are based on an open kind of dialogue and open discussion. And in fact, we've talked a lot about what your natural instinct is versus what you coach yourself to do. I have to talk myself into using, prepping people for what I'm about to tell them. I have to talk myself into not talking to my 9-year-old the same way I talk to my 17-year-old. I have to coach myself into 3 positives for every 1 correction, but definitely direct.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Trent, this has been an amazing interview here. How can people follow you on social media or keep up on the work you're doing here at Cicero?
You bet. I am pretty active on LinkedIn, less active on some of the other social media platforms. So pretty easy to search for me, Trent Kaufman, Cicero Group. Also, our Cicero Group page on LinkedIn and Twitter are pretty active. You also can sign up for our newsletter straight on our website. And we are producing a quarterly thought leadership paper, a newsletter that I would put against anyone's in the world. We're producing some really good thinking about, various topics such as the data-driven growth, how to overcome some of the basic change management implementation challenges that companies face. So those are some of the key ways.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Trent, it's been great to be with you today, and thanks for taking the time to meet with us here.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks.